Let's bring in Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House, and author of a new book called Shakedown. Also the husband to Callista, who is the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. So they are in Italy at the moment. Good morning to you, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning. And it is mildly encouraging that the number of cases in Italy does seem to be plateauing. And I think it's the first really positive sign we've had since this pandemic started.
So here's what they say. The rates have been down for a lowest rate of death in the last 2 weeks after a week of stabilization, fewer in the ICU, more in recovery. Is it time, do you feel, this administration, that country, to look at phase 2? And what might that look like, Newt? Do they have immunity tests that would give people certificates like Germany's doing to get people out back in the workplace?
They don't yet. And frankly, President Trump's pledge of help was very well received here. We've already seen, for example, that Samaritan's Purse launched an entire hospital in northern Italy with some 60 doctors and nurses as volunteers, and they've been busy ever since they arrived. I think the Italians need the help. This was a country with a weak economy. It's now pretty shattered because 14% of the economy was tourism, and currently it's zero. At the same time, and this is going to be true all over the world, we're going to have to prepare for a second wave, and that means a lot more investment in testing equipment, a lot more investing in the right therapies, and frankly, I think a more methodical approach to this that looks at individuals, not just at huge populations. Places like Sweden, which are focused on individuals, or Singapore, or South Korea, have done a much better job with much less economic damage. So that's got to be part of, I think, our phase 2 as we move into that phase. And hopefully, with the news from New York, we may actually be peaking in New York as well as in Italy.
Well, you know, Newt, when you look at the stock markets around the world, Asia and Europe finish way up today. The futures in the United States are up, I think, about 800 points in the hopes that we could be rounding the curve. Nonetheless, you are a student of history, a famous student of history. And while we have heard that this is going to be the hardest, saddest week of our lives, our Surgeon General framed it yesterday in historical terms. Listen to this.
This is going to be the hardest and the saddest week of most Americans' lives, quite frankly. This is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment, only it's not going to be localized. It's going to be happening all over the country. So I want Americans to understand that as hard as this week is going to be, there is a light at the end of the tunnel if everyone does their part for the next 30 days.
So, Newt, he made it very clear. It's going to be a rough week. It's going to be historic. But nonetheless, we are eventually going to get over this thing.
Well, you know, Callista and I have had that experience here. We've been under lockdown. The Italians allowed this to get away from them, and they've had to go to a very strong regime to try to get it under control. They were affected in part because there are about 100,000 Chinese in northern Italy, and they had a direct flight 3 times a week to Wuhan, which they didn't cut off, unlike President Trump. They allowed that flight to continue for several weeks after the epidemic started. So we've seen here in Italy, and frankly, as the ambassador of the Vatican, it was very sobering for Callista to watch the Pope in an empty St. Peter's on, you know, one of the most important days in the Christian religion on Palm Sunday. But that's reality right now. We have to focus on defeating the virus. And I think that also means preparing now for a potential second wave, making sure we continue to manufacture testing equipment, making sure we continue to develop better therapies. Don't just wait around for a vaccine, but let's see if we can't just therapeutically get it so people don't get particularly sick. But we have to assume that there could be a second wave coming. Dr. Fauci's talked about this. My answer to that is think through how you can have a healthy economy by preparing in advance to test and isolate people. So if there is a second wave, we can handle it with much less effort than we handled this shocking first wave.
You wrote in that op-ed on foxnews.com about harming the economic health, how this virus is harming our economic health. And you have a solution to save small businesses. Tell the folks at home, if they haven't read it, what that solution is. How do we cure the problem there?
Well, part of it is starting as soon as we can to get small businesses back being active, doing things. I will say, I think that the small business program that they have developed is a very important bridge. But you have to think of it as a bridge. It's a bridge back to helping small businesses develop the right approaches. I happened to be in Korea when this started, and they immediately went, for example, to testing temperature of every person walking into a restaurant or walking into a hotel. They were very, very vigorous about trying to identify who might be carrying it and work from that standpoint back. The result was they really were on top of this at the very beginning. It's something I'm actually producing a paper with Claire Christensen outlining the experience in East Asia. We can do better than we have done. This is a transition period. This was a great shock to us, but now we need to roll up our sleeves. And one of the keys to that is helping small businesses not only with a bridge loan that becomes a grant if they keep their employees, but also thinking through by the middle of summer how we get people back to work, get restaurants open, get people in a position where they can be with each other without fear.
That would be key. Thanks, Mr. Speaker. We'll talk to you again. Italy curtailing some of those numbers going down gives us hope here. Meanwhile, come